Welcome to Module 6 of the Certificate for Project Management course presented by Charter Australia. Module 6, Risk Management. In this module we will cover the entire risk management process, from identifying and analysing risks through to controlling risk management during the project life cycle. What is a risk? Risk is an uncertainty about the future. Any action you take results in consequences. Even routine activities like driving a car is open to risk. Things can and do go wrong. Project risk is an uncertain event or condition that, if it occurs, has a negative effect on a project objective. A risk has a cause and, if it occurs, a consequence. For example, a cause may be requiring a permit or having limited personnel assigned to the project. The risk event is that the permit may take longer than planned, or the personnel may not be adequate for the task. If either of these uncertain events occur, there will be a consequence on the project cost, schedule, or quality. Project risk includes both threats to the project's objectives and opportunities to improve on those objectives. It has its origins in the uncertainty that is present in all projects. Known risks are those that have been identified and analysed, and it may be possible to plan for them. Unknown risks cannot be managed, although project managers may address them by applying a general contingency based on past experience with similar projects. Organisations perceive risk as it relates to threats to project success. To be successful, the organisation must be committed to addressing risk management throughout the project. In the Scope module, we discussed assumptions as being situations about which we may be uncertain, but about which we will assume a certain outcome. Of course, that outcome may not happen, so assumptions always have an element of risk and should be included in your project risk analysis. Risk management planning is the process of deciding how to approach and plan the risk management activities for a project. It is important to plan for the risk management processes to ensure that the level, type, and visibility of risk management are commensurate with both the risk and importance of the project to the organisation. Risk management is all about implementing contingency measures that will allow for the smooth and efficient handling of issues that would otherwise interfere with the achievement of project objectives. The risk management processes. There are 7 risk management steps. The first one is establish the context. Step 2, identify the risk. Step 3, analyse the risks. Step 4, evaluate the risks. Step 5, treat the risks. Step 6, monitor the risks. And Step 7, communicate risk outcomes. We'll discuss each step in detail in the following slides. Step 1. Establish the context. This means that we must work out how to manage risk on our particular project by applying the organisation's risk management guidelines, if you're lucky enough to have them in your organisation. Every project has differing amounts of risk, depending on the type of project. For example, a project which involves designing and building a concept home on a difficult block of land will be much riskier than erecting a garden shed in the backyard using a kit. The emphasis on risk identification and management would be very different for both projects. Risk, like quality, costs money to manage, so it's important that the approach be tailored to suit the situation. It's also important to identify the stakeholders who will be involved in the risk management processes. For example, where there are technical risks, it may be prudent to involve additional subject matter experts who have had prior experience with that type of work. Risks fall into various categories. You can categorize risks however you like. However, typical breakdowns of the types of risk categories are safety risks, especially for construction and engineering projects, technical risks, especially for IT or engineering projects, and business risks. These cover things like risks associated with customer interactions, resource risks, etc. Step 2. Risk identification. The best way to identify project risks is to hold one or more risk identification workshops, where subject matter experts are able to brainstorm the potential risks to the project. At these workshops, the focus is to identify the risks, identify the possible cause of each risk, and to determine what the impact to the project would be if the risk eventuates. For example, a typical risk for our school fete example would be the risk of rain. The cause would be the bad weather. The impact would be that the ground would be muddy and people would not come, so the fete would be a flop. All risk identification information must be documented. We use a risk register to document risks, so this information will be the beginning of your risk register. Now try risk identification for yourself. Can you identify the risk in this picture? What would be the cause? And what would the potential impact be? Well, the risk is that the truck could slip off the blocks that are holding it up. The cause would be the use of unsuitable lifting equipment. And the potential impact is that the person could be killed or seriously injured. Step 3. Analyse risks. In this step we will analyse the identified risks in terms of probability or likelihood, and also the level of consequence or impact should the risk occur. We assign a rating of high, medium or low to both probability and impact, and then use a table such as the one shown on this slide to determine an overall risk rating. Some organisations have a table which has more granularity, but this one is commonly used for business projects. Doing this enables us to rank or prioritise the risks. Step 4. Evaluate risks. This step involves evaluating which risks are acceptable and which risks are not, and prioritising the risks which are not acceptable. If a risk is to be acceptable, there will be no immediate action taken regarding this risk. You will, however, still need to keep a record of all identified risks, as the risk rankings will need to be monitored during the project. Events may occur which cause the ranking of a previously acceptable risk to change. Reasons for accepting a risk may be that 1. The threat is so low that treatment is not warranted given the available resources, or 2. The cost of treatment would be so high that there is no option but to accept it. Once you have culled the acceptable risks, the remaining risks should be listed in order of priority from extreme down to medium to enable further risk analysis to be focused on the most important risks first. Step 5. Treat the risk. Risk treatment discussions should also be workshop-based and involve the subject matter experts who may have already had experience with that type of risk. At this point in time, a range of possible treatments may be identified. These should be analysed to determine whether those actions would lower the rating of the original risk or whether those treatments would in themselves create new risks. Usually a cost-benefit analysis is done. The selected treatment is then also entered into the risk register. At this point in time, schedules, budgets and resourcing will need to be reviewed in order to accommodate the risk strategies. Risk treatments fall into 4 major categories. The first one is avoid the risk. Do something to remove it. For example, use another supplier. Second risk treatment is transfer or share the risk. That is, make someone else responsible. Perhaps a vendor can be made responsible for a particularly risky part of the project, or insurance can be obtained to cover the event of the risk occurring. Joint ventures or partnerships are also a way of sharing risk. Thirdly, mitigate or reduce the risk. This is the most common action, and it is action taken to lessen the impact or chance of the risk occurring. If the risk relates to availability of resources, for example, identify alternative suppliers and draw up agreements to allow suppliers to be changed if deadlines are not met. Fourthly, accept the risk. We've already discussed this option. This is when the risk might be so small that the effort to do anything about it is not worthwhile. Remember, always update the schedule and budget to accommodate risk treatments. Creating a risk register. This slide shows 2 possible risks which were identified for the School Fete project. Firstly, we cannot source sufficient merchandise such as books and second-hand items. Of course, the event would be a bit of a failure if we didn't have enough merchandise for our stalls. The probability would be low, the impact medium, so the overall risk ranking using our table would be medium. We'll assign this risk to Mary to manage. The agreed response strategy is to advertise in the local paper. This is a mitigation action. The second risk is that the weather is not suitable for the fete. Of course, no one will come. The probability is medium and the impact would be high. Therefore, the overall risk rating using our table would be high. We'll assign this to Jill to manage. The agreed action is to insure against losses for the weather and to provide funds for planning for an alternate date. This is a risk transfer strategy. It is important that every risk be assigned to someone on the project to manage. That person will be responsible for both monitoring and controlling that risk and reporting back to the project manager on a regular basis. Step 6. Monitor and review risk. As we just said, it's important that every risk be assigned to someone on the project to manage. The questions to be asked during risk monitoring are: is the risk ranking still appropriate? Are the assumptions still valid? And are the risk treatments working? Remember that the risk register is a living and breathing document which must be kept up to date throughout the project. All changes to management of a risk must also be reflected in the other project controls such as the schedule, budget and resource assignment. Of course, all changes to risk management must also be communicated to the project team and to the key stakeholders. Step 7. Communicate risk outcomes. It's important that all impacts, changes and outcomes of managing project risks be communicated to the project team, customer and other key stakeholders. This is mainly done through regular meetings and status reports. This ends Module 6, Risk. Please read Module 6 in your UNEP textbook. You will now need to complete the following assignment for your case study project and submit it to your tutor. The risk register. Use the qualitative risk register template. Please refer to the case study assignment instructions and supporting templates.